Aziza was heartbroken after losing her son Kemari to the cursed river. For days, she barely ate or slept, just crying over his small body. The villagers didn't know what to do. Finally, Elder Karim went to Aziza's hut. "Child, we must put Kemari's spirit to rest properly," he said gently. "It's time to prepare his burial." Aziza slowly nodded. She bathed Kemari's body with sacred river water and dressed him in his finest clothes. The whole village then gathered to bid him farewell. As Kemari's body was laid in the grave, Aziza stepped forward. In a voice thick with grief, she began chanting in that same strange ancient language as before. The villagers shivered. Her words seemed to hold great power. When the chanting ended, Aziza threw handfuls of red and black powders over Kemari's grave. Instantly, the dirt began shifting and mounding upwards like it was alive. The villagers gasped as the freshly dug grave rose up into a large mound, shaping itself into a miniature mountain. Aziza then sank to her knees and bowed her head low. When she stood, tears were streaming down her cheeks again, but her expression was one of peace and acceptance. "My son's spirit now rests in the hallowed grounds, safe from any curse or evil," she said resolutely. "He has returned to the river's eternal embrace." The days and weeks passed, and life went on in the village, albeit tinged with sadness over Kemari. But Aziza had changed. Her smiles were warm but short-lived. Her eyes always looked haunted, viewing the world through a mother's profound grief. One night, Aziza woke with a start. Something felt wrong. She looked around her small hut, but everything seemed normal. Yet she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Suddenly, a cold chill ran down her spine as she heard a faint whisper. "Mother?" Aziza's heart pounded. That voice. No, it couldn't be. She held her breath, straining her ears. There it was again, a soft, familiar whisper. "Mother, help me." It was Kemari's voice. Aziza leapt from her bed, tears streaming down her face. "Kemari! Kemari, my son! Where are you?" She spun around, searching desperately. The whisper seemed to come from outside. Aziza flung open the door and raced into the night, following the sound of her son's haunting voice. It led her through the village and into the dense jungle surrounding it. Branches whipped at her face as she pushed deeper into the darkness. "Kemari, I'm coming, my son." Finally, she emerged in a small clearing, and there, hovering above Kemari's grave mound, was a faint, ghostly figure. Aziza gasped. It was Kemari, his translucent form flickering like a candle's flame. "Mother, you must help me," his voice echoed all around her. "I'm trapped, bound to the river's curse." Aziza fell to her knees, sobbing. "No, Kemari. I laid your spirit to rest. You were supposed to be at peace." Kemari's ghost drifted closer, his eyes sad. "The cursed river is powerful, Mother. My body is buried, but my soul remains ensnared. You must break the curse, or I'll be trapped forever, suffering unimaginable torture." Aziza's hands trembled. "What must I do? I'll do anything to free you, my son." "You must journey upriver," Kemari whispered, "to the cursed river's source. There, you'll find a way to break its hold on me. But beware, Mother. The jungle is filled with dangers. Evil spirits and cursed beings will try to stop you at every turn." Aziza swallowed hard but nodded resolutely. "I don't care what stands in my way. I will save you, Kemari. This I vow." As the first rays of dawn began filtering through the trees, Kemari's ghost slowly faded, but his final whisper echoed through the clearing. "Be brave, Mother, and trust no one." Aziza quickly got ready for her dangerous journey up the river. She packed some basic things: dried food, water containers, a rope, and her sharp machete for cutting through the thick jungle. The people in her village tried to stop her, saying the mission was too dangerous for one woman alone. But Aziza had made up her mind. She had to save her son's troubled soul, no matter what. Before leaving, Aziza visited her son Kemari's grave one last time. Kneeling down, she pressed her hand to the soft earth. "I will come back, my son. Wait for me," she whispered firmly. Then Aziza began following the cursed river inland. The jungle closed in around her right away, blocking out the sun's light. Twisted vines and gnarled branches caught on her clothes and skin. Aziza cursed under her breath as she cut her way through, the humid air making her weak. She had only been walking for a few hours when she heard it, an eerie crying sound, drifting through the dense leaves and branches. Aziza froze, listening hard. There it was again, a sad cry like a baby in distress. Her heart ached. It sounded just like Kemari's cries when he was an infant. Feeling an urgent need, Aziza changed direction, pushing towards the source of the haunting cries. She stumbled into a small clearing and gasped at what she saw. A young woman from the village stood there, cradling a tightly wrapped bundle in her arms. She rocked back and forth, softly crying as she nuzzled the bundled form. Aziza felt a lump in her throat. She recognized this woman. It was Amina, one of the newest mothers in the village. Her baby son had been born just days before Kemari's tragic death. "Amina!" Aziza called gently, not wanting to startle her friend. "What are you doing out here?" Amina looked up, her eyes wide and staring. Her face was deathly pale. "My son," she whispered. "My beautiful son." A cold knot formed in Aziza's stomach. Trembling, she stepped closer and peered at the bundle in Amina's arms. What she saw will be forever stuck in her mind. It wasn't a baby at all, just a grotesque bundle of sticks, vines, and mud, roughly shaped like an infant. Amina seemed utterly convinced it was her child, cuddling and cooing at the woven monstrosity. "Amina, that's not your son," Aziza cried in horror. "We have to get you back to the village." But the deluded woman just backed away, clutching the bundle protectively. "No, you can't take him from me." Her eyes bored into Aziza's, wide and not understanding. Then Amina turned and fled deeper into the jungle, her wails fading into the shadows. Aziza stood there, shaken to her core. What sort of dark power could cause such a terrifying delusion? She had no choice but to continue on her way, praying she wouldn't encounter any other victims of the jungle's evil trickery. The jungle seemed to grow darker and more overgrown the further upriver she traveled. Soon, Aziza was cutting her way through an oppressive tangle of vines, branches, and hanging roots, creating a claustrophobic maze. The dank air stank of rotting plants, and she could have sworn she heard scurrying creatures all around her. She tried to move quickly, her skin crawling. Suddenly, a gnarled root seemed to reach out and grab her ankle. Aziza yelped as she was pulled off her feet, crashing to the ground. Panicked, she swung her machete, cutting the offending root. A foul-smelling green ooze gushed out, sizzling as it hit the jungle floor. Aziza scrambled to her feet and backed away, panting hard. There was no doubt in her mind now. The jungle itself was alive, and it wasn't going to let her pass easily. Gripping her machete tightly, Aziza pressed on, cutting and slashing her way through the ever-thickening vines and roots. More than once, she had to stop to furiously cut away at the grasping tendrils holding her fast. Her arms and legs were soon covered in cuts, oozing the same vile green pus as the cut roots. But she refused to give up. Aziza finally staggered into a small, clear space, gasping for the stale air. Her whole body screamed with pain and exhaustion. She collapsed to the ground, her vision blurring. That's when she heard it. A soft tapping sound. Straining her head up, Aziza's blood froze in her veins. There, just a few feet away, stood a twisted, half-human figure. Its lower body seemed almost melted into the very ground, gnarled vines and roots woven into its grotesque form. But its torso and head were unmistakably that of a man. The creature looked at her with dull, lidless eyes as it slowly raised a gnarled arm, ending in 3 sharp wooden spines dripping with the same green ooze. Tap, tap, tap. Too drained to even scream, Aziza simply watched in mute horror as the creature pulled its arm back, staring at her unblinkingly. Despite her bravery, despite her desperation to rescue Kemari's soul, she knew in that moment she was going to die. The creature tensed, ready to strike. But just then, a piercing screech shattered the heavy silence. Something shot from the shadows, a black blur of fur and fangs. The jungle creature barely had time to turn before it was knocked to the ground, its throat torn open in a spray of foul green fluid. Aziza could only stare as a massive black panther stood over the thrashing monster, growling deep in its chest. With 2 more swipes of its claws, the creature's head was fully severed, steaming fluid pouring onto the soft earth. Amazingly, the vines and roots began writhing almost immediately, slowly absorbing the decapitated monstrosity's form back into the jungle floor, until only a wet stain remained. But the panther wasn't done yet. Padding over to Aziza, the huge cat fixed her with fierce golden eyes. It opened its powerful jaws, giving her a full view of its gleaming fangs, and then spoke in a bone-chilling, rasping voice. "You are being hunted by an ancient evil, born of this cursed jungle. I sense great loss and determination in you, daughter of the village. Speak your journey's purpose quickly, before the beasts return." Too stunned to be properly afraid, Aziza found her voice. I'm traveling upriver, to the source of the curse, to break it and free my son's spirit." The panther's eyes seemed to bore into her very soul. After a tense pause, it gave a curt nod. "Then you must have this." With that, the panther turned its head and sank its jaws into its own thick black fur. With a sickening tearing sound, it ripped out a clump of its coat. Aziza stared in horror at the weeping wound, red blood quickly matting the animal's sleek fur. But the panther acted like it felt no pain. Instead, it extended the clump of fur towards her with an expectant look. Despite her revulsion, Aziza knew better than to refuse the jungle spirit's offering. With trembling hands, she took the blood-soaked fur clump from the predator's jaws. "That fur is filled with my spirit's energy. Carry it with you, and it may keep you safe from the cursed jungle's vile deceptions. I will guide you as far as I can. Now come, we must keep moving before more beasts are drawn by the smell of blood." Without waiting for a response, the massive panther turned and began loping deeper into the jungle. Not daring to disobey, Aziza clutched the wet fur to her chest and scurried after the spirit guide. They kept walking through the thick forest. Sometimes, gross monster things came out to attack them. But the big black panther just growled loudly, and the monster things went away scared. Aziza held tight to the bloody fur clump. She was so tired and hurting from all the cuts, but she didn't stop. After walking for a very long time, they came to a stinking swamp. Bubbles were popping up from the dirty water and it smelled really bad, like rotten eggs. The panther stopped at the edge. "This is as far as I can help you," it said in a rough voice. "The curse's dark power is getting stronger ahead. You must use the spirit fur to protect you now." Aziza's heart was beating fast. She was so scared, but she nodded bravely. "Thank you for your help, jungle spirit." The panther dipped its head. Then it turned and ran away, disappearing back into the deep forest. Aziza looked at the foul swamp waters. She could see human skulls and bones sticking out here and there. Her stomach felt sick, but she took a deep breath. "I have to keep going. For Kemari." Holding her machete and the spirit fur tight, Aziza stepped into the dirty swamp. The foul water splashed around her legs as she waded forward. She tried not to look at the skulls. Suddenly, there was a loud noise and a smelly green gas burst out of the swamp all around her. Aziza gasped and coughed, covering her nose and mouth with the fur clump. The gas stung her eyes and made her dizzy. Through the haze, she saw shapes coming out of the swamp. At first, they looked like waterlogged dead bodies, until they got closer. Their bodies were disgustingly bloated, with skinny limbs and sunken, skull-like faces. Their eyes were empty black holes, and they opened their mouths in terrible screeching wails. Aziza wanted to run, but she stood her ground, holding the spirit fur up protectively. "Stay back, cursed ones," she shouted in a shaky voice. The corpse things ignored her, continuing their eerie advance. Aziza shut her eyes tight, holding the fur up like a shield as the first one lunged. But no attack came. After a few moments, she opened her eyes again. The corpse things were gone. Somehow the spirit fur had protected her, making the evil swamp visions disappear. Feeling enormously relieved, but also more tired than ever, Aziza kept going forward. Hours seemed to pass as she walked through the never-ending swamp. She shuddered each time her feet touched another skull or bone. The foul smells clung to the air, making her feel feverish. Just when she felt she couldn't go on any longer, the water became shallower. A short distance ahead, Aziza could see a raised piece of firmer ground. A twisted dead tree stuck up from its center, skeletal branches reaching at the dirty sky. Forcing her shaky legs to keep moving, Aziza finally pulled herself up onto the little island of land. She collapsed on her back, sides heaving, staring tiredly up at the bare branches above. That's when a new horror appeared over her. Dozens of shriveled humanoid forms hung from the dead tree's branches. Their tiny leathery bodies twisted gently in the swamp's smells, hollow eye sockets gaping down at her. Aziza opened her mouth to scream, but an eerie sound stopped her. It was a raspy whispering. The shrunken corpses were whispering, their bone-thin lips barely moving. She strained to understand the words. "Give it to us." Again and again, the papery voices chanted the same eerie phrase, building to a dry roar. "Give it to us! Give it to us!" Aziza huddled on the ground, shaking violently, realizing the horrid things wanted the spirit fur. She held it close as the whispering grew deafening, pulling it over her face to block out the sight of the dangling corpses. Just then, a loud snap made her jump upright. One of the shriveled forms had dropped from the branch and hit the ground inches from her face. Its skull twisted towards her, jaw creaking open in a lipless shriek. "Give it to us, sis!" Before Aziza could even think, she was stumbling to her feet and running. Not caring about the scratching branches and dangling bodies, she ran ahead blindly, churning through the shallow swamp waters and thick smells. The shrieks followed her, growing more fevered. "Give it! Give it! Give it!" She ran until her legs gave out, pitching her forward into blissfully deep water. Aziza let herself sink beneath the dirt, the cries finally muffled. She floated there, every muscle screaming, just trying to breathe. When she finally surfaced, Breaking through a patch of floating scum and vines, she looked around in bewilderment. The swamp seemed to have ended, leading to a large open area. A series of rocky ledges climbed higher, the treetops far below. As she dragged herself out of the water and onto a mossy bank, Aziza realized she had reached the headwaters of the cursed river at last. The cliff faces ahead looked tall and forbidding, as if the very heart of the jungle was hidden beyond. She was so close now, but could barely gather the strength to keep going. Aziza collapsed on the bank, her grip on the damp spirit fur, the only thing keeping her conscious. No matter what other terrors lay ahead, she knew she had to keep pressing on to this evil's source. Her son's tormented soul was waiting, somewhere beyond those cliffs. Aziza shut her eyes, mustering what little courage she had left.